You're listening to Mom and Doc Talk, where we talk all things healing PANS and PANDAS with an emphasis on homeopathy. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are here for a follow-up episode from our last episode with Dr. Palevsky, Dr. Larry, as he likes to be called, all about ADHD. And we wanted to really bring it in. We got to talk a little bit about homeopathy and ADHD, but we didn't, we wanted to make sure we got to have him share his experience and his expertise and his viewpoint. So we wanted to bring it together today to talk about how we manage homeopathy with ADHD, or manage ADHD and homeopathy more clearly, and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that Dr. Larry suggested as necessary or vital components for recovery from ADHD. So Jody, first, I'm going to just ask you how it rang for you with some of the stuff about ADHD being, that question about whether ADHD is a diagnosis or just a way that someone is wired. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Overall thoughts, I really enjoyed listening to his explanation of what specifically is going on in the brain. And that was, being someone that has lived with ADHD, pretty extreme ADHD since third grade, I was really happy to hear that. I do understand, it's got to be a diagnosis, but also I know personally for me, it's how my brain functions. It's how I live and how I am. And that's not likely ever going to change. But I'm going all over the place.
Yeah.
Reel me back in
So
here.
I bring this up because I think it's relevant for the conversation with homeopathy, right?
Yeah.
Because right before we got started recording, you were asking me about what healing with homeopathy for ADHD in the absence of PANS looks like and what recovery looks like. And so that's why I wanted to start with this, the idea of whether we're dealing with just the way somebody is wired, or if we're dealing with something that is a diagnosis, and whether we're all supposed to be the same, which isn't necessarily what Dr. Larry said, but it's stuff that it's a way that things could be interpreted or taken, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how somebody listens to it.
I feel like I've experienced ADD two very different ways. The way I've experienced, where I've had it forever and it's just a part of me, but then I also experienced it in the way that Avery had it, and hers was a true onset with PANS.
Right.
And then it was completely gone once she was recovered.
Yeah.
And so it's like hers is clearly so different than how I experience it. And, just my curiosity on, what you see and how homeopathy addresses each of those.
Yeah. So I think that there is validity to including it in the neurodivergence, and I'm putting air quotes around that, the neurodivergence realm, because I think that there are traits that people can have that are in common that get labeled with ADHD that persist regardless of how well they're doing. I also think that ADHD is something that has a pathology component to it, perhaps, because of the way that it can fluctuate. ADHD it varies. It's not persistent, that it's always there's certain things that are persistent, that your brain is just, this is how you relate to the world. This is how you think about things. This is how your brain functions. And then there are times in the absence or presence of medication that it varies, and that it's worse or it's better, right? And so and that's even in the absence of a PANS diagnosis, right? So PANS is clearly, it's just worse when we're dealing with a flare, and then it's not present when we're outside of a flare. And that's what you saw with Avery. So what I will say is, to answer the question that you asked before we got started, was that You wanted to know if like the healing patterns for ADHD without PANS was different. And I said, yes, it's slower and more steady, because it's a more persistent thing with some mild fluctuations. It doesn't have the rapid fluctuations that we see in PANS PANDAS or like something like bipolar disorder with really, really dramatic shifts in mood that can happen very quickly. So it does tend to be like a slower, more progressive thing. And you asked what healed looked like. And I was like, well, let's just start recording because,
Right.
the question of what healed looks like, maybe we should do an entire podcast episode on that. It's kind of up for definition, because there, if your hope is that you're going to take somebody who has a way that they are wired, like if we're saying that having ADHD or having autism or is similar to being an extrovert or being an introvert, and it's just part of how you are wired, how you relate to the world, where you get your energy, how you process thoughts and all of that, which I would put it in those places. Like we're not going to change, like you're not going to heal introversion, right? And so
Yeah.
why would you heal somebody just because we labeled it with something and created a medication for it? Like there's ways that the brain works when you have the diagnosis of ADHD that are so beneficial to the world. Like I
Mm.
remember seeing something on social media that was like, why are the people who have ADHD considered neurodivergent when they're the ones, like how is it normal to be able to focus on something instead of attending to all the things around you? Like what brought us to this place in the history of the world was the people who were attending to all the things around them and able to alert everybody else like, hey, you got to move, there's something coming.
Yeah.
um and so like how is it not neurodivergent to be able to focus? Like that's just what doesn't make sense. And I'm like
Hmm.
that makes sense to me. Um and here I am on my little bunny trails all over the place, right? So forgive me. I'm just
Both of
gonna
us.
also fully disclose I have a migraine while we're recording this. So we're dealing with both like the way my brain operates and a migraine. So I think that when it comes to healed, like the like definition of what does healed look like, maybe we just need to set some expectations for that, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not going to, like I said, we're not going to turn an introvert into an extrovert. We're not going to turn, you're not going to like make it so that somebody who has a tendency to pay pay attention to all of the things and then seem like they can't pay attention to anything because they're paying attention to all of the things. That's probably not going to change. What will
Yeah.
change is the suffering and like the ability to manage that and recognize when that's happening and
Yeah.
intentionally bring focus back.
Yeah. I think that like when I think about it for me, like if the bumbly fumbly part of me were to be taken away, that would kind of like, that's just who I am. I kind of bumble and fumble through life and it's silly sometimes and it's irritating sometimes, but that's like so much of who I am. If messing up what I'm saying or stuff just dumping out of my brain, that's just so much part of who I am. I would not want that to fully go away.
Well,
But
and
the
with every
suffering, yes.
yeah, with every downside, there's an upside too, right? So
Mhm.
like, um, people who have ADHD have a much stronger intuition and are able to make connections for things in the big picture because they're paying attention to all of the things that make
Mhm.
it seem like it's hard to focus on like A, B, and C, but we're looking at the whole alphabet and able to make decisions and see things in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't have the ability to like quickly see and move through all those things.
Yeah.
So I say all this to say like my goal in healing with PANS and no, with ADHD in the presence or absence of PANS and PANDAS is to not need medication to be able to function. Um, it does mean that as long as you are living in a setting and functioning in a setting that is not set up for somebody who has ADHD, you're going to need to use some coping strategies or have like extra tools to help navigate that setting that is just not designed for how your brain works. Um, So I don't think that we're going to turn somebody who has ADHD into the necessarily like the highest performer with no difficulty or challenges or just complete ease in high school or college or anything like that. There's still going to be strategies that need to be taken to um, work with who you are and how your brain works. Um, but we see people able to do that using homeopathy and a few just like basic strategies with like um you know, diet can help. And we'll talk about diet in a minute because that was one of the big things that Dr. Larry brought up. Um, and just various strategies to help with the reminders, like the things that you know are weaknesses that you can use. So to me, that's where what I'm looking at is to eliminate suffering and to not need medication to be able to function in the world. Does that sound like reasonable to you, Jody?
Yeah, I think so. I think it gets cloudy though, if from looking at it from a PANS mom
Yeah.
perspective, because especially when you're in homeopathy, because maybe everyone didn't experience it like this, but um I kind of got into the space where I felt like homeopathy was supposed to fix everything.
Yeah.
And at the end, whenever we were still working on the ADD stuff or ADHD stuff, I was like making myself crazy, like trying to like figure out why it wasn't fixing this and fixing it faster. But yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, that's just one thing to remember is that homeopathy is not, we can't use homeopathy to biohack something. We like
Yeah.
homeopathy is not going to change who we are at our core and how we are wired. It's going to help eliminate pathology and eliminate as much suffering as is possible as long as you're a human, right? Like part of
Mhm.
being a human involves some amount of suffering. But the like big picture suffering that is like a daily nagging thing we want to be able to get rid of, like homeopathy is just, it's not going to turn you into a superhuman. It's not going to make things perfect. But it's going to make you the best version of yourself. Um, so let's dive into some of the stuff that Dr. Larry brought up that were important, in his opinion, for healing with ADHD. And I agree with many of these things. And the reason I want to talk about them is because when you hear them, so the top things that I have written down here from our conversation were sleep, diet, vision, sugar, toxins, and then addictions. And he specifically brought up porn addiction, which is, obviously something that we need to be aware and alert to because it's not necessarily even just an addiction. It can also be a trauma where somebody was exposed to something that they at too young of an age. So those are all things that I agree with. Those are all
Mm.
things that are challenges that contribute to and exacerbate and ADHD and make it worse, make it harder. And I think that those are things that can contribute to the fluctuations that we see. But when you
Yeah.
say all those things, it's like, okay, so how do I make all of these things better? Like I just have to be perfect and then I won't have ADHD. I mean, do you feel any of that when that type of thing is said?
Uh, yeah, like when he was going through that list, I felt very overwhelmed with all
Yeah.
of it because it
And we
was
did
so
talk to him
much.
about that. Yeah. So what the reason that I wanted to make sure we talk about this with homeopathy is that homeopathy can help with these things. And that's one of the things that I think is so important to hear. And this is true whether you have ADHD, autism, PANS, PANDAS, some other complex chronic illness, any of these things that we think about where sleep and diet and sugar and toxins and addictions play a role. Vision, not so much in necessarily all of those as it does in ADHD, but all of those things play a role in any complex chronic illness. And
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody who's listening to this who has anything that they're dealing with, like, okay, well, I try to sleep, but I can't. I eat the best that I can, but I'm struggling with whatever, or I don't have time to eat like this perfect diet. Um, toxins, what am I supposed to do? There's microplastics everywhere in our water. There's all of these things. And then, addictions, well, like the addiction is there for a reason. Like addictions usually start as a way to medicate something. It's like it's soothing something, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so homeopathy is a vital component for recovery from any complex chronic condition, um, and the suffering that's associated with ADHD, whether PANS and PANDAS related or not. because it can help regulate these things without having to just use willpower for them. I
Mhm.
think that's one of the hardest things, right? When you're dealing with something, I actually, um, I've been thinking a lot about addiction lately because of something going on with a friend of mine. And addiction is not something you can just necessarily fully willpower your way through, right? And changing your diet is not like, there's so many studies that have shown like you can't just willpower your way through diets. Um,
Yeah.
you can't just will your way to sleep. And toxins, like, okay, you can do your best to avoid everything that you can, um, but you need your detoxification systems that you have inside your body working better to help you navigate those things. Like, we've got ways that our body can handle all of this if we just give it the right support and the right nudges. And that's
Mhm.
what homeopathy does, is it helps nudge the body so that those things that either are pathologically not operating the way they should, like slow or poor detoxification processes, if you've got sleep disturbance or some sort of sleep pathology, if you've got something that's contributing to dietary challenges, a healthy body in a healthy state seeks sleep and wants to sleep when they have the appropriate sleep pressure. They
Mhm.
want to eat healthy food. They want to move their body. It's able to detoxify, and it's not seeking something that is addictive to fill the need, right?
Mhm.
So rather than like, not that Dr. Larry was necessarily like wagging any fingers at anybody, but like, let's not wag any fingers. Like, all of these things are present when somebody is struggling. It's part of the suffering, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it is itself part of the suffering.
Yeah. I think listening to that as a mom, because my different areas of experience with complex chronic conditions, um, listening to it as a PANS mom, I'm like, whew, that's so much. And yes, it's a good idea to pay attention to the food that we're giving our kid, like try to feed them as healthy as possible. It's a good idea to, you know, make sure that we're keeping their chemical load, their chemical burden down as much as we can. Exposures to dangerous things like, toxic mold and stuff like that. All of these different areas we pay attention to, but then I also have the experience of being a mast cell mom to an extreme mast cell kid. And I had to pay a tremendous amount of attention to every single one of those things, and I know what it did to my health
Yep.
and my brain. And I think that I am still and will be recovering from that for years because it was so much, and it was everything all at once, and everything had to be fixed immediately. I think that it can, that's an extreme example. But I think as parents that we can just do the best we can with each category, try to get, whole foods into our kiddos, try to, keep the chemical exposures in our home as low as we possibly can. But we can't control PANS by controlling all of those things. The
When you
body
can't
still has to
control
be
a lot of those
healed.
things, right?
Yeah,
Like, I think that's part of it, is we have to accept the things we can control
yeah.
and make those choices where we can. So like, for instance, yesterday I was making dinner for my family, and I was making broccoli, and there was like, I was gonna have it steamed or whatever, and I had the choice to either steam it in the plastic bag that it came in, or to take it out of that plastic bag and put it in my more safe cookware and steam it like the old fashioned way. And there
Mhm.
was a moment, I'm not gonna lie, there was a moment I was like, oh, it's a long day. I'm solo parenting this weekend. So like, there's part of me that was like, it would be so much easier if I just did this. And then I was like, no, I stopped myself and I said, no, because I even had the thought, I was like, there's microplastics, like the water I'm giving her has microplastics in it. There are things that I can't do anything about. So why am I picking and choosing these little battles? And then
Mhm.
I was like, because this is one that you can choose. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you can't protect her from everything that is out there in the world. And you can make the choices about what you intentionally do. So like the places where you've got a choice, you can make the choice, right?
Mhm.
And then I know that between me making enough good choices and using homeopathy with her to help ensure that her body is getting the nudges when it needs it,
Mhm.
that her body is going to do the best that it can with what she has as is like her base ideal situation of wellness, and the world that she lives in, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not just you that suffers when you are trying to control all of the things that you can. Um, your your kiddos suffer too, right?
Mhm.
Um, I always and like it's a hard thing to say and it's a hard thing to hear that all of the things that we do to try and protect our kids from things can sometimes indirectly or inadvertently make things worse for them. Um,
Mhm.
but it can, in part because of the fact that moms are the nervous system of the family and are especially PANS kids, they're so sensitive, and kids with ADHD too, they just tend to be more on the sensitive side. Like they're just
Yeah.
so because they're so sensory sensitive in general. That they're going to be more sensitive to what's happening around them, and what's happening with the people who are the people they trust the most and they care about the most. And so your suffering does affect your kids. And so that's where we have to just pick and choose the battles that we're going to fight.
Yeah. Because that's a hard thing to do with the PANS kid.
Yeah.
Uh, the food fight is so hard, and even more difficult if you've got a restrictive eater.
Yeah.
It can make the whole pan situation that much more worse,
Yeah.
trying to manage it.
And that's one of the things that I love about homeopathy is it gives you more freedom and flexibility to pick and choose battles,
Yeah.
right? Like
Mhm.
that's honestly it's part of the genesis of our relationship and our collaboration, Jody, is that um going to conferences and like learning all about all of the functional medicine approaches and all the things which I have a lot of respect for, and like I'm grateful that there are people who are doing that, and I definitely see benefit. I mean, I'm a fellow of the Medical Academy for Pediatric Special Needs, and that's a functional medicine situation. So I obviously see value in it. And it's just, I felt so overwhelmed, even just as a like practitioner. I felt so overwhelmed with all of the things. And then realizing that I was looking around at these people who were saying, do all of these things and then not living that themselves. And I'm like, and if you can't even avoid that gluten-filled, dairy-filled, egg-filled, soy-filled cake that's being served at lunch at this
Mhm.
conference, how do you think a mom with kids with extra needs or special needs or whatever, however you feel best identifying that, just kids that need a lot of things, how are you going to give them injections and a whole bunch of pills and really strict diet, and where do you find time and like and the cost associated with so many things? And so that's what was the genesis of our collaboration, was to try and bring together where the recommendations from docs meet reality.
Mhm.
And I was just reminded of that both in the conversation we had about 80 in several of the conversations that we've had. Um, but it just also reminds me about why homeopathy is so important and so
Mhm.
valuable for restoring health, regardless of what your challenge is that you're dealing
Yeah.
with.
And even in homeopathy, because whenever I started working with you, Avery was, I think, 5.
Yeah.
Um, and I wasn't even thinking like long term down the road what this looks like. And now thinking about like the things that I'm doing with her, because we are 4 years away from sending her out into the world. And when I came to you, Avery was allergic to dairy, gluten, soy, like all of these things. And I was restricting all of the things. Blue food dye was one of her worst ones, and that would cause extreme ADHD symptoms in her. I mean, she would just go bonkers. So now where we're at now with her now, being recovered, being she is not allergic to any of those foods, like I'm trying to teach her moderation and
Yeah.
to make good choices herself. But also, I know she's going to college and she's getting the blue slushy. I let her choose the blue slushy now sometimes, but homeopathy gave us the ability to do that. And we can have the blue slushy without having any symptoms whatsoever
Yeah.
because she's just, her body's not responding the same way to it. But it's such a long-term thing,
Yeah.
right? Because we're not always going to be able to control. I like Avery's going to go out and do what Avery wants to do, regardless of her allergies or
We
anything.
all are, Jody. That's the
I
thing.
know.
Like we're all humans and like we for some reason we all see, I mean, I don't know, maybe you are different than me, and maybe I am projecting my own stuff on the world. So I'm just here about to tell you all my stuff, right? But like when we restrict something and when we say you absolutely cannot have this thing, it becomes the thing you want the most. And you
Mhm,
think about it a lot. And then when you do finally cave and have that thing, then you binge on that thing. And
mhm,
then you don't have good boundaries with it because it becomes this thing that is going to be taken away again at some point. So I have to get as much of it in now as I possibly can because
yeah,
I know I'm not going to allow this thing again tomorrow. Like we'll
yeah,
say that to ourselves. Oh, well, I guess I had it now, so let's just may as well have a whole bunch now and then start fresh tomorrow. We say it with
mhm,
diets, we say it with sleep, we say it with all of the things that are on my list here. We say it about like, I mean, we say it about the TV shows that we're watching, like, oh, I should get to bed, but so I'm up late. I'm gonna watch another one. I'll get to bed at a better time tomorrow. And we have that like, feeding dopamine addiction way of dealing with like social media and all the stuff. So
mhm,
we could go down that whole route. I feel like when we are using homeopathy, we're able to set ourselves up for a better life without necessary restrictions that can
mhm,
themselves become pathologies and create bigger problems or different problems down the road.
mhm.
Um, so
I agree.
all right. We went to let like all over the place on
Did
this.
we talk about ADD? See, I think
Yeah.
we just were ADD in this
Yes,
conversation.
it was an ADD episode about ADD. But I think that we made the general point, which, it would have been a really short episode if we didn't like talk about all the other stuff, right? Because the point is homeopathy is effective for ADHD, whether it is out in the context of PANS or not. The management looks a little bit different. It's a little bit more slow and steady. And you are beautiful, and your child is beautiful with your ADHD, and you don't have to completely eliminate it and be a neurotypical person in order to thrive and do well. You can eliminate the suffering that you have because of ADHD and eliminate the need for regular medications and give yourself access to the coping tools that you need to use when you are in a setting that is not most conducive for somebody who has a brain that operates like apparently ours do.
Yeah.
All right, we'll wrap for today. And maybe we'll figure out that there's something we should have talked about and we'll come back and have another episode. That happens to us sometimes. Um, so until we see you guys next time, take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
We hope you found this episode helpful, hopeful, and inspiring. We try to get a new episode out every week. You can make sure you don't miss any by following us on Spotify or subscribing to our channel on YouTube. If you want to connect with us more, join our Facebook group, Homeopathy for Pans and Pandas, where we have exclusive weekly videos and answer your questions about, you guessed it, homeopathy for pans and pandas throughout the week. If you are already a member, give us a shout out and let us know what you thought about this episode. If you aren't on Facebook and would like to reach us, you can email us at podcast@resiliencenaturopathic.com. Until next time, take care and remember, this won't be forever.